Back in 1960, chimpanzees were considered a mindless and peaceful species, living in harmony with nature, uncorrupted by human inventions such as wars, murder, and evil. But when primatologist Jane Goodall arrived at the Gombe Stream Research Center in Tanzania in 1960, our entire perception of our closest relative would fundamentally change forever. It had previously been thought that chimpanzees were vegetarians, but now it was discovered that not only did they use tools to fish for termites, but that entire hunting parties were regularly organized to catch the smaller colobus monkeys and eat them, sometimes still alive and screaming, without an apparent trace of cross-species sympathy. Furthermore, it was discovered that high-ranking female chimpanzees would hurt, kill, and sometimes even eat the babies of other females in the same group, just to put them in their place in the hierarchy. But in 1974, it got even worse. There were several territorial communities in the Gombe National Park, one of which were the Kasakela chimpanzee community, led by the aggressive Humphrey since 1971, who once almost killed a human by hurling a large rock at his head. Over time, the community began to turn sour, with brothers Charlie and Hugh starting a rebellion against Humphrey, resulting in the Kahama chimps splitting from the Kasakela and settling in the south. On January 7, 1974, a party of 6 adult Kasakela males, led by Humphrey, spotted the Kahama male Godi feeding alone in a tree. They ambushed him, and then proceeded to pull him from the tree with force and beat him with a large rock. Allegedly, he managed to crawl away, never to be seen again, though the victorious Kasakela stayed and celebrated, throwing and dragging branches with hoots and screams echoing throughout the forest. The Gombe Chimpanzee War had begun. After the death of Godi, Dee was taken out next, and then Hugh, one of the 2 brothers who had founded the Kahama community. Next was the elderly Goliath, who throughout the war had been relatively friendly with the Kasakela, but his kindness was not reciprocated, and he too was mercilessly killed. 3 Kahama males remained, the last leader Charlie and then Sniff and Willy Wally, who was crippled from polio. Charlie was the next to be killed. He didn't even get a chance to fight back, leaving the Kahama without any real leader. And then Willy Wally disappeared, never to be found again. The last male, the young Sniff, survived for over a year, and for a time it looked as though he would be spared or even welcomed back into the Kasakela community, but eventually he too was killed. Most of these murders were systematically planned by the Kasakela, who waited until one of their enemies would feed alone in a tree, separated from their group as chimpanzee males usually do. Only then, when their target was distracted and alone, would they strike in force. Of the 6 Kahama females, 1 was killed, 2 went missing, and 3 were beaten and kidnapped back into the Kasakela group, who then proceeded to take over the former Kahama territory. Thus ended the Gombe Chimpanzee War after 4 years of brutal, planned killings, with 10 casualties on the Kahama side and only 1 on the Kasakelas. These territorial gains would not last long, however, as their new territory now bordered the far stronger Kalande community to the south, who after a few violent skirmishes along the borders forced the Kasakela to retreat back north, giving up most of their new territory. Eventually, hostilities died down and the regular order of things in the Gombe National Park was restored. The outbreak of the war came as a disturbing shock to Jane Goodall, who had previously considered the chimpanzee to be, although similar to human beings, rather nicer in their behavior. Witnessing the cannibalistic infanticides of high-ranking females, the brutal killings of smaller monkeys, as well as the systematic killings of another group with an unmistakable resemblance to human wars, gave rise to horrific nightmares for Goodall in the years to come. Indeed, the entire scientific community was shocked by these findings, and in the beginning Goodall was not universally believed, with some claiming her presence and interference had given rise to these violent clashes, and some accusing her of arbitrarily attributing human traits to regular animal behavior. However, later research has confirmed that chimpanzee societies do indeed wage war against one another in their natural state, and that this war, a war unlike any other as it had been described, is in fact far more common than we had previously thought. It is today believed that this particular war started over the lack of fertile females, as well as the tyrannical rule of Humphrey. So what can we learn from these disturbing findings about our closest relatives? What conclusions can we draw about our own origins and the true nature of humans? I leave that for you to decide. A big thank you to my Patreon supporters who helps making these videos possible while I work on two far larger projects. The Lord of the Rings, the history of Arda every year, together with Oli Bai and Fiona Ra, and World War III every day, inspired by What If Alt Hist. If you too want to support me and get previews and behind the scenes footage of my work, please consider pledging any amount. If you pledge a lot, it helps a lot, and if you pledge a little, it helps a lot, especially in these difficult times. Thank you.